4 years after the COVID pandemic began, the way we work seems to be forever changed. Many companies now employ full-time remote workers and even use more of a hybrid model where employees work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Meanwhile, big cities are trying to figure out what to do with giant office buildings that now sit empty. It is a massive change to the way that we live, with all kinds of ramifications for the economy, our daily lives, our communities, and our mental health. For tonight's Spotlight, we are going to dive deep, and I have two ideal panelists to help us do it. Nicholas Bloom joins us, economics professor at Stanford, who has studied work-from-home policies for decades, and my dear friend Arthur Brooks, a Harvard professor, contributing writer for The Atlantic, and co-author of the best-selling book, Build the Life You Want, which is out now. Nicholas, you have been studying work from home for years and years and years. The fact that we're now in this work from home revolution, it's like all your work is finally playing out. So it is only fitting that we are interviewing you remotely. Give us your case why it's such a great idea.
I am speaking to you remotely, but I have spent most of the day in person. I've actually just had about 6 hours of teaching, which I tell you is very much in person. You are right. Work from home is basically here to stay. It's not like in the peak of the pandemic when we were fully remote. It's basically a hybrid for most professionals and managers. So typically they're in the office, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're working from home for Monday, Friday.
Why do you think it works so well? Especially for places, especially for places that have gone full remote. Why do you think it's so great?
Well, full remote is a really very different thing. So full remote, there are some challenges. You got, productivity around mentoring, around training, around building culture. The big upside when you talk to firms is it's incredibly cost effective. So what they say is, fully remote maybe reduces productivity by 10%, but it's saving us office costs. That's about 10%. And then we can hire people nationally or globally. That's maybe saving us another 20, 30%. So fully remote is less of a productivity play. It's much more of a cost play.
Arthur, let's talk about this mental health crisis and sort of this epidemic of loneliness.
Right.
Do you see remote work being connected to that? In theory, people are like, this is great, I'm more efficient, but it only adds to the fact that people are talking to you about your job function, but not about your life.
Yeah, that's right. And, the truth is that most people who are happy in their jobs have a best friend at work, and nobody has a Zoom best friend at work.
No.
There's no relationships like that. And that's a big problem for a lot of people who came out of college during the coronavirus epidemic, and they don't know normal workplace activity, and so they can't get back to these kinds of relationships. Loneliness is funny, Stephanie, because it sneaks up on you. People are actually sometimes lonelier than they understand, and they'll start to feel a real sense of emptiness in their lives. And it'll start to hurt their home relationships because they don't have outside relationships, and they don't know what the problem is. They'll start to sleep really poorly, and that will start to affect their work as well. The other thing that's worth keeping in mind is that people who are fully remote or almost fully remote, people who don't elect to go into the office very much, if they have that election, that they don't do as well in their careers. They're starting to get passed over for promotions. We're starting to see a two-tier work system, and this is Nicholas's area. He knows a lot more
like
than
an out of sight, out of mind.
Well, totally.
Promotion time. If people don't see their workers, they don't think to elevate them.
Yeah, and also there's less communication, and quite frankly, the productivity isn't as good for people who are never quite there. Is the way that because people will elect to not be there for a reason, not to cast aspersions, but let's be honest. If you said, look, what I really want is a lifestyle job, and a lifestyle job means I'm going to live someplace that I can afford that's nice and sunny. I'm moving to Tucson, even though my job is in San Francisco. That says something about you, and your employer's going to notice that.
Do you agree with that, Nicholas?
A lot of it, yes. It's funny, as Arthur was saying, I actually just in class, 2 hours ago, surveyed 40 of my undergrads and said, how many days would you guys like to work from home? They're all seniors, so they're going to start work next year, a week. And the average was 1. So, they were basically saying, look, we want to go in 4 days a week. We want to get mentored. We want to develop. What you do see is as folks get into their 30s and 40s, they have young kids. They have other things in life. They have childcare. Someone is actually saying they're helping look after their grandmother. Other priorities come into play. And so there's a natural lifestyle in your 20s. My oldest kids, they're both early 20s. It's a good idea probably to go into work 4 days a week. When you're in your 30s and 40s, maybe you're, in 2-3 days a week, possibly you're fully remote because you can't both get a house you can afford in the space. So there is a mix of things, but broadly I'm aligned. I think for your career, you generally see people that are coming in more days do tend to get promoted faster.
Nicholas, you say the idea of return to work died in 2023, and I hear that it's not a full return to work, it's a hybrid, but what is your take on now what's happened in cities and communities across the country where we now have these massive empty office buildings, right? All the local lunch places have gone out of business, the dry cleaners. It's not individual workers' responsibility to solve this commercial real estate crisis, but how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, you're right. So to be clear, money is still being spent. GDP the economy is doing very well. It's just it's being spent in different places. So yes, the center of cities like San Francisco, less New York actually, but San Jose, Seattle, some of the big West Coast, some East Coast cities are struggling. But the suburbs are absolutely booming. So people are working from home. It's a Friday. I don't get the sandwich at lunch in the city center, but I go to my local, Au Bon Pain or Pret a Manger. There is an adjustment. So change is always hard. And the hardest thing really is those big city skyscrapers downtown. Interestingly, the old ones, the ones built before 1930, typically tend to be tall and skinny because that was before electricity was around. And so you had to build buildings so you could see daylight. Those things convert pretty easily to residential because you have a lot of windows and, they make apartments. The real problem is buildings built in like the 60s, 70s, these massive kind of ugly buildings with vast floor plans. And nobody's really sure what's going to happen. Some of these places are going to lie empty for a while. Eventually, they'll be scrapped or reconverted. But yes, that is probably the biggest problem is a lot of these modern, ugly office buildings that are now empty or half filled in city centers.
How do you think this is going to play out, right? In places like New York, where we have so many people back in the office, you notice it less. But when you go to, let's say, D.C., where many, many people that work for the government are still remote, the city feels kind of hollowed out.
Well, it's a sort of a double whammy for a lot of these cities. So these cities many of them are very poorly managed. And so you notice that when we've been, these policies that have actually meant city centers have become less and less and less livable at the same time that people are not going there to work. Well, you're going to see the effects of that. The more that it's harder to go there, the less people are actually going to go there when they have the choice of not actually going to work. And so that's really hurting places like downtown San Francisco, where you can get office space for a fraction of what you were able to get it for. And we don't know how that's going to shake out. Quite frankly, these downtown areas might be very different 10 years from now.
Before we go, Nicholas, do you see sort of a demographic disconnect where maybe some of the oldest people in the workforce, maybe some people that are kind of in management, can't get their head around work from home? Even after COVID, they're saying, okay, it only works if I see you, if I'm handing you this report to work on. And at the same time, there's younger people that have only known remote work who see no value in coming back to the office. Do you see a generational disconnect?
The funny thing is, yes, the way it works out is a lot of folks in their 20s want to come in 4 days a week. And one of the big reasons is they want to get mentored. They say, I want to learn, I want to develop, exactly as Arthur's saying, I want to push my career on. But somebody has to do that mentoring. So there has to be someone up above them. And that means 30, 40-year-olds. And often these are the folks that say, because of my kids, because I want to go play pickleball, play golf, whatever it is, I'm going to work from home 2-3 days a week. And I've talked to a bunch of CEOs that are saying, this is really hard to trade this off. And so what CEOs are often in this situation, they really need to get the middle managers in, not every day, but 3 days a week. So they're there to train the folks below them.
Last word to you, Arthur?
Yeah, I mean, but let's remember, there's a huge part of America for whom this is a completely irrelevant conversation. I have a son who's a manager at a construction firm, and he's walking around construction sites all day long. The idea of working from home means literally nothing to him. I have another son who's a high school math teacher.
He's definitely got to come in.
He's got to come in. Well, as long as the schools are in session, he's got to come in. And so the result is, what is this weird conversation that we're having? Because for them, it's how they live their lives, it's how they do their jobs, and exactly the way they would have done it 10 years ago.
All right, then. Arthur, Nicholas, thank you all so much. We're going to have this conversation again in a year and see what the world's looking like. I appreciate you joining us for this Spotlight conversation.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.